Hello and welcome to part 1 of a beginner's guide to working into foundation chains. In this part we're going to be looking at creating our foundation chain and then working with single crochets into the top loop only. Please grab your yarn and hook and let's begin. First method we're going to look at is a top loop only. So to do that I'm going to create my slip knot. I do that by putting the yarn over my hand, holding it in place with my two lower fingers, place my thumb at the top to give that a bit more security up there, and I wrap the yarn around my fingers making an X. Continue wrapping it around, hold it in place with my little finger. You need to make sure you're holding the yarn securely with your little finger and your thumb so that your slip knot doesn't collapse as you're trying to make it. Next I turn my hook downwards, I go under the first loop, over the second loop, and I pull that through. I continue to pull that loop up in the air, at the same time letting my fingers fall out. Again, it's important here to make sure you're holding the yarn securely and pulling down gently so that you create your slip knot. Okay, creating our chain, holding the yarn and the hook any way you find comfortable. I hold it underneath, some people hold it on top. You need to try a few ways and find out the most comfortable way for you. Okay, to make our chain, our yarn goes over the hook and we pull it through our loop just once. Yarn over the hook, pull it through that loop. I give a little pull on my hook as I bring it out, just to make sure that my loop's not too tight, which means it's going to be easy to pull the next yarn through. So you can see I'm lifting it up just a little bit. I can show you what it looks like if I do it too tight. And now if I try to pull my yarn through, it's going to get stuck. So I'm going to undo that last couple. Try and keep a consistent tension. Don't worry, that's a skill that will come with a lot of practice. Yarn over, pull it through that loop. Yarn over, pull it through that loop. Yarn over, pull it through that loop. What you need to do is try and keep a consistent tension. Try and be consistent, that's the key. When you're giving the hook a little raise, make sure you're doing it the same amount. As I've just shown you what can happen if it's too tight, the same can be said if you pull it through and make it too loose like this. I know I'm exaggerating here, but as you can see, it's very easy to make your chains, but then when you look at it, suddenly no longer consistent. So I'm going to undo those for you again. Okay, yarn over, pull through. I'm going to do a sample size of about 20, just so that it's easier to demonstrate how we work into it. So I'm going to show you right now how we count our starting chains as well. This bit at the start is just our slip knot. We don't count that. We start with our first loop. Again, you can count your chains in various ways. You can just count where the middle gap is, 1, 2, 3, or you might like to stick to that single loop on the bottom and count that, 1, 2, 3, or the double loop at the top, 1, 2, 3. Either way, I generally count the gap in the middle. So far I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's that last one in there. 7 chains. I'm aiming for 20, so I'm going to keep going. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So I've done my foundation row, my chains. I have 20 of them. I'm ready to start working back and working into those chains. First thing I need to do, I'm just going to be doing single crochets. The first thing I need to do is a turning chain. So I'm going to do another chain. I've done 20, but I'm going to do one more. This does not count as a stitch, as part of my work. this is a turning chain, which means it's going to give height to my work so that when I come back, I'm going to be at the right place. If I just turned around and went straight into it, the ends of my work would look scrunched up because there's no gap. So think of it as raising the ladder so you're ready to work at the next level. Because I'm doing single crochet, I've done my turning chain, I'm working into the second chain from the hook. That's my first chain, the turning chain. I need to go to the second one, which is right here. And what I'm going to be doing on this round back is just working into the top loop. So there's my first chain, turning chain, doesn't count. Here's my second one. What I'm aiming to do is just get into the top part of that chain. So that's my chain. I'm just going into the very middle of it, and I have one strand on top, the top loop. My yarn goes over, I bring it out, yarn goes over again through both of those loops on my hook. And as you can see, I've started to work back. It'll take a bit more shape as we work along. This is my chain in here that I did not work into, and as we work along you'll notice that that will raise a bit so that our work will be at the right height to come back. So let's have a look. This is the chain that I've just worked into. I now need to work into the next chain. That's this space here. I'm going to be picking up just that top stitch, so I'm going to go right into the middle. I only want the top of the stitch. Got one piece of yarn on top. My yarn goes over, then my yarn goes over again, and I can pull that through both. It's a single crochet. Finding my next stitch, that's the chain I've just worked into. Moving along, here's my next chain, and again I want to go into the very middle of the stitch, just making sure I get one loop on top. Yarn goes over, pull that through, yarn over, pull that through again. Okay, so far I have done 1, 2, 3 single crochets, and at the end is my turning chain. Let's keep going. So I've worked into this stitch. I need to move along to work into the next stitch. My hook is going to go into the very middle. As you can see, I've got one yarn on top, one piece of yarn on top, which is exactly what I want. Yarn goes through, yarn goes through again. Looking at the next one, worked into here, you can see that the stitch is coming out of this gap, so I need to move along now to the next one. Now I want to be working straight into the middle of the stitch, straight into the middle of the chain, so I only have one piece of yarn on top. Yarn goes over that, and over and through them both again. What I don't want to do is put my hook back into the same stitch, because that will mess up the amount of stitches that I have, as well as be incorrect and make my garment or project look messy. If you skip a stitch, that's probably not going to be so disastrous, but you will have a gap. So again, I've worked into this stitch, need to move over now and get into the middle of the next one. One piece of the yarn on top, which means I've picked up the right place. I can complete my stitch. One piece of yarn onto the top and complete my stitch. And you can see it's looking very consistent. And if I turn it around the back, same deal at the back, looking consistent as well. You can tell it's not as attractive as the front side. That's the back side of our work, and this is the front side. Let's continue working across. So I've worked into this stitch. I now need to move over to the next gap, or you can see that single strand on top. That's where I know I need to go in and pick that strand up. There we go. Into the next one. Now you can see my work is starting to curve around a little bit. It's got a slight curve. That's one of the things that often happens with your foundation chain. It will be tighter than the rest of your garment. Depending on what you are making, that will not be noticeable in the end. If it is noticeable, it's your tension, and I have that same issue. What I often do when I'm doing my chain, my foundation chain, is I do that in a slightly bigger hook. I just go up half a size. I'm currently doing this with a 5. I would use a 5.5 hook to do my chains, and then change to a smaller hook, and you would have a less noticeable curve. Let's continue into the next gap. So there's our first gap. We want to go into the next gap now, pick up that next loop. Hook goes over and pull that one through. This is just single crocheting, which is an American term. In the UK they would call this a double crochet. Same stitch. I worked into this gap. I need to move over. You can't always see the gap, especially if you are using a fluffier wool, but you can generally always see the curve on top, which is the next piece of yarn that you need to pull up. So I'm working straight into the middle there. I'm going to show you a few other things that might happen if you've made an error. I can see that I need to go right into there to pick up this next chain, but if I go into this spot, suddenly I have 2 strands on top of my hook, so I know I've gone into the wrong place. I can simply take my hook out and I can start that again, going again, making sure I'm going into this space, so I'm just picking up 1 strand. Hook goes over, back out. Okay, next one along. Need to go into this space here above the cross. So there's a bit of a cross underneath, you can see, and that gives you a clue as to where you need to go next. Make sure you've got 1 strand of yarn. Pick that up and bring that through. Another single crochet into there. Next strand, or 1 piece on top, straight through there. Grab that yarn, pull it through, and yarn over, pull it through again. If we have a look at our work, we can see a very consistent pattern. Again, that slight curve that I was talking about, but with more work, it can, depending on your project, it can become totally invisible and not noticeable at all. I'm going to continue now, almost at the end of my 20 stitches. I'm going to go through again, making sure I've got 1 stitch on top, 1 piece of the yarn on top. The yarn goes over and we put that through again. I'm going to show you what will happen if you miss a stitch. If I miss this chain and I work into the next one, I'll show you that how you can notice if you've done this. Not as noticeable, but you can see there's a gap there. If I get my work, just pull it apart slightly, you can see there's a gap right here. This is this chain that I did not pick up. So again, I can just undo that, pull that out pretty gently, and go back and pick up that missed stitch just here. 1 piece of yarn on top, I'm in the right spot, pull that through, pull that through again. Now I can go back into that stitch that I missed, to that chain, pull that through again, into the next one, worked into here, I'm going to now work into the next one, pull that through and through again. Now I'll show you what will happen if you work into the same stitch twice, into the same chain. So I'm going to go back into that same one, pull that through, and you'll see got a bigger gap here, and if I do the next one, this will make it a bit more noticeable. You can see an odd shape. It's definitely a big gap there and a big curve. You've got 2 stitches in the same chain. So we can just undo this, take out that extra stitch we didn't need, and I can continue on into my next stitch. and into the last one. You can clearly see here, this is my slip knot. I don't need to touch that. This is the last loop, the last chain that I need to work into. So I can go into there, pull that through, pull that through. And if I lay this down, you can see it's a fairly consistent pattern. And there is that slight curve I spoke about, which what can happen if your foundation chain is a bit tight, which is a general issue I have. I normally would work in a higher hook for that first chain row. I'm going to show you how to count your chains now to make sure you have the right amount. If we go back to the start of our work, this here was my turning chain, so that does not count as anything. If I look above, I can clearly see my stitches, which are these loops. I generally count with the gap in the middle. So for this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And that's my loop that I'm working into. 20 chains is what I started with, and I have 20 stitches. To continue on from here, I will turn my work around. I need to do another turning chain. Remember, a turning chain lifts up our work, lifts up our hook and yarn, so we're ready to start the next row at the right height. So turning chain does not count, but from here I will go straight back into that stitch there. I'm just going to do a few stitches along just to show you how that will look. 2, 3, and that is first row in a starting chain, just using single crocheted stitches.